Welcome to Ask and Learn.
Hey, it's Clarissa. So we're going to do a big O notation for each one. For A, we're given f of x, and using the distributive property, we eventually get 18n cubed log n plus n square log n square plus 20n cubed plus n square log of n plus 34 log of n plus 38. So we're going to assume that g of n is equal to n cubed log of n. For convenience sake, we'll say that k is equal to 10 to the 20, so we'll use n is bigger than 10 to the 20. So if we absolute value f of n, we get absolute value, and then I'll just do it here, which is equal to 18 n cubed log of n plus n square log of n square plus 20 n cubed plus n square log of n plus 34 log of n plus 38. We're going to use log of n is less than or equal to n. So we get this is less than or equal to 18 n cubed log of n plus 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 n cubed log of n. And this is equal to 23 absolute value n cubed log of n So we need to choose C to be at least 23. So we have C equals 23. And by the definition of the big O notation, f of n is equal to n cubed plus n squared log of n times log of n plus 1 plus 17 log n plus 19 times n cubed plus 2 is O of n cubed log of n, with k equals 10 to the 20 and c equals 23. So for part B, we're given f of n is equal to 2 to the n plus n squared times n cubed plus 3n. So using the distributive property, we have n cubed times 2 to the n plus n to the 5th plus 6 to the n plus n squared times 3n, and we're going to assume that g of n is equal to 6 to the n. When n is bigger than 3, we have the property n cubed is less than 3 to the n, and when n is bigger than 2, we have the property n squared is less than 2 to the n. So for convenience sake, we're choosing k is equal to 3, so n has to be bigger than 3. So like we did for part A, we're going to absolute value this. And this is equal to n cubed times 2 to the n plus n to the fifth plus 6 to the n plus n square times 3 to the n. This is less than 3 to the n times 2 to the n plus 3 to the n times 2 to the n plus 6 to the n plus 2 to the n times 3 to the n, and this is equal to 4 absolute value of 6 to the n. So C has to be at least 4. So C equals 4. And by definition of big O notation, we have f of n is equal to 2 to the n plus n squared times 3 n to the cube plus 3 to the n. And this is O of 6 to the n with k equals 3 and C equals 4. Finally, we have C. I'll erase this part here to make some room. Okay, so for part C, we are given f of n. We're going to use the distributive property, and we get let me just divide this. We get n to the n factorial plus n times 2 to the n factorial plus 5 to the n factorial plus n to the n, 5 to the n plus n times 2 to the n factorial plus 5 to the n times 5 to the n. And we're going to assume that g of n is equal to n to the n times n factorial. When n is bigger than 5, we have the properties 5 to the n is less than n to the n, and n times 2 to the n is less than n to the n. And when n is bigger or equal to 12, we have the property 5 to the n is less than n factorial. So for convenience sake, we'll choose k is equal to 12, so x is bigger than 12. We're going to absolute value this, and when we do that, we get n to the n factorial plus n times 2 to the n factorial plus 5 to the n factorial plus n to the n 5 to the n plus n times 2 to the n factorial plus 5 to the n times 5 to the n is less than n to the n factorial plus 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 n to the n factorial. And this is equal to 6 absolute value n to the n factorial. So C has to be at least 6, so we'll make it 6. And by the definition of the big O notation, f of n is equal to n to the n plus n to the 2n plus 5 to the n times n factorial plus 5 to the n, and O of n to the n factorial with k equals 12.